With the recent release of Brothers of Legend, it feels like Altergeists have more options now than they have in a long time. Altergeist Pookuery is a great card not only on turn 1 for setting up a Hextia, but also in the mid and late game for helping you OTK the opponent. Altergeist Memorygant is a card I haven't really talked about that much on the channel, but it really does make a big difference. It's an excellent boss monster and it helps you break a lot of boards that otherwise would have been pretty tough to deal with. That being said, as much as I love Altergeist, and trust me, I do love this deck, I really think right now Altergeists kind of suck. The main problem is that Altergeists do not have a good Sword Soul matchup. When you go second, they pretty much win every single time, but even when you go first, oftentimes they can throw so many cards at you that unless you open a perfect hand, you just won't be able to deal with it. The Sword Soul matchup feels really bad because it kind of seems like you have to draw tech cards to beat them, but they don't have to draw tech cards to beat you. They just get so much advantage over every single turn. It can be a lot to keep up with unless you draw a perfect opening. This creates a rough situation because as a competitive player, I don't really want to take a deck to a tournament that has a bad matchup against the current most popular deck. And I think that Altergeists do have a lot of good tools to beat Sword Soul, but if you just open a regular Altergeist hand and they open a regular Sword Soul hand, oftentimes they can just win anyway, which is a real problem. Right now, I feel the format is pretty diverse overall. There are lots of good going second cards to break boards. There's lots of different decks being played, but I really don't think Altergeists are very good right now. Pretty much in every single matchup, if you go second, you are probably not winning unless you draw a very specific hand like Impermanence and Faker, and that's obviously not a good spot to be in. Furthermore, I think that Silk is really bad right now. It doesn't get a lot of value in the Sword Soul matchup because most of their synchros have on-summon effects, so you're forced to do awkward plays like bounce the token back just to try and prevent them from synchro summoning, and against the Leerless deck they have so many extenders that one bounce doesn't really matter, which is different compared to the older Tri-Brigade deck list where they didn't have a lot of extenders, so Silk was very good. Against Flunder, Silk basically does nothing, and they can chain block your Protocol and Strike, so Altergeists aren't really good in that matchup either. And I know this sounds really negative, but I have to be honest with you guys here. I really don't think Altergeists are that great right now, which is a real disappointment. In terms of the deck itself, like only looking at Altergeists, the deck is better than ever. It has so many good combos that it can now perform that we weren't able to do in the past, but the overall power level of the format is so high that it doesn't even matter. That being said, in today's video, I wanted to show you guys my deck profile that I played this past weekend in a couple regional qualifiers. Honestly, I didn't do great in these events. I think the deck is about as good as you can get it. The main thing here is that Altergeists aren't bad because of any specific build. Like, you can play all the tech cards you want, but when you draw the actual Altergeist cards and you don't draw those tech cards, some of the most popular matchups can be pretty challenging, which obviously isn't a good spot to be in. There have been plenty of formats in the past, and I'm sure they'll happen in the future as well, where if you just open Protocol plus Faker or a way to get to that, you have a pretty strong chance of winning. But right now, every deck has so many extenders and so many going second cards that it's really tough to play Altergeist if you want to be competitive. I think the deck is good at a local level, and I'm sure it'll be good in the future again once some of these top decks get hit, but for the moment, I can't really say that I recommend playing Altergeist. That being said, I wanted to show you guys my deck profile because I did spend a lot of time on it, and I do still think this is one of the best ways to play this deck right now, and I did play some pretty cool tech cards that I wanted to share with you guys. Okay, so we play, of course, 3 copies of Altergeist Marionettor, 3 copies of Altergeist Multifaker, 3 copies of Altergeist Meluseek, and let's talk about Pookuery for a second here. So I know a lot of people play 1, I know a lot of people play 2, not many people play 3, but I will tell you that I played 3 and I don't regret it one bit. If anything, I didn't draw this card enough, even at 3 copies per deck. Now, I do understand how people come to the conclusion that you should only play 1. It's very searchable. You have Hextia, you have Spoofing, you have Meluseek. You can get to Pookuery pretty easily in this deck. However, the main reason I like this card, and the reason that I think this card helps out Altergeist so much, is that it helps you make Hextia on turn 1. That's what I talked about a couple days ago in my video about this card, where I also showed off a few gameplays if you want to check that out out as well. But I think this card is relevant because it helps your turn 1. And when you can summon that Hextia on turn 1, it is a huge deal. You want to open this card, and honestly, even if you open 2 copies, you can just normal summon one of them and make the Hextia with the other one in your hand. That is still honestly not that bad of a play. So I think that this card is a 3 of in my opinion. I know a lot of people probably aren't going to agree on this, but I have played Altergeist for a while now, and I really feel like the deck needed a good going first card, so that's why I want to play 3 copies. I want to open this card in basically every single hand. Will people agree with this? I have no idea, but judging from the comment section that I've seen over the past couple of days, it seems like a lot of people are not playing 3 of this card, but personally I really like it, and I think at 3 copies per deck it is perfect. I sided 1 out a lot when I went second because it's not as good when you go second, but I think when you're going first you really want to have the extra copies of Pookuery in your deck. And like worst case scenario, you just shuffle it back with Spoofing. It's an extra name for that card, so that actually does come up every once in a while. We also played 2 copies of Silk, 1 copy of Concrete, of course, and then I think that Veiler is like one of the better hand traps right now. We're also playing Impermanence, of course. I don't think Ash is that impactful, and also it's a hard once per turn. I like having hand traps that you can use all of them in the same turn when you go second. I think that is pretty important. Every deck right now has like a million extenders, so I think Veiler is a bit better than Ash if you are playing hand traps. I think it's fine playing Ash and Veiler and Impermanent decks, but I think for this deck, I really only had space for 3 cards, and I really think that Veiler was like the perfect choice for this event. We had 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. Some people asked if I was going to switch to Prosperity now that Pookuery is out, because you really don't want to banish your Hextias. I don't think that's necessary. I still think that, especially right now with every deck having so many extenders, you just want that card advantage. All the cards in your deck are good to draw. Even the like bricks, I guess, are fine to draw because you can shuffle them back with Spoofing. You really just want card advantage, and the chances of you banishing all 3 Hextia off of 1 Extravagance are pretty darn low, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. For the trap cards here, we have 3 copies of Personal Spoofing, of course, 2 copies of Altergeist Protocol, 1 copy of Altergeist Manifestation, 3 copies of Impermanence. Luckily, and this is good for the deck, there is one positive thing I can mention here. Impermanence is actually one of the best hand traps in the format, if not the best hand trap in the format. I've mentioned this before, but I think Altergeist and how good they are in a format is very dependent on 2 things: how good Silk is and how good Impermanence is. Right now, Imperm is very good, but Silk is kind of meh, so it's kind of rough for Altergeist, but it is good that Impermanence is a very good hand trap right now because it's a card that you always want to play in your Altergeist deck. We also played 3 copies of Solemn Strike, of course, 3 copies of Solemn Judgment, and I didn't think I was going to do this, but honestly, this card super overperformed. I did main deck 3 copies of Dimensional Barrier. So I have a video from a couple weeks ago about this card. This thing is good in basically every single meta matchup except for Flunder, because they don't go into the extra deck at all, but against every other matchup, D-Barrier basically just forces your opponent to pass, and the card is honestly like pretty good going second as well. It's not like amazing, but if your opponent like uses a Baron to negate one of your trap cards, you can chain the D-Barrier and blank their entire board and sort of floodgate them. I also really like this card after side decking because it's a chainable card. Everyone right now is playing Lightning Storm and Evenly Matched in their side deck, just more reasons to not play Altergeist, but you really want chainable cards because of that, and I think that D-Barrier is one of the best ones. You very easily can open, and I did this in the tournament, and I did win that game. You can go set D-Barrier and 1 other trap card and have a Faker in hand. Even if you have other trap cards in hand, that is such a safe play in games 2 or 3 when you are going first, because if they open the Lightning Storm, if they open the Evenly Matched, you can simply chain the D-Barrier and then on resolution, special summon the Faker. So you can do some pretty crazy stuff with this card where like this is one of your only set cards and you keep all of the other trap cards in your hand just to see if your opponent has that Evenly Matched or that Lightning Storm, because after turn 1 you can very easily set up a Hextia, so you're not really worried about those cards after turn 1. It's just turn 1 that you're trying to survive, and D-Barrier is insanely good at making sure you survive until the next turn. So I think this card was one of the best choices in the deck. It's a very good card right now just in general, but I think in this deck especially it is extremely powerful. And then 1 copy of Order. Everyone already knows this, but if you draw this card going first, you are probably going to win that game. It's just kind of like an auto win card that you can have in the main deck. For the extra deck here, we have 3 copies of Hextia, 2 copies of Prime Banshee, and 2 copies of Memorygant. So I think that you might be wondering why I'm playing so many of these cards. I know a lot of people play like 2 or maybe even 3 of Memorygant. I'm only playing 2 right now. So basically when you open Pookuery, you go into Hextia turn 1, and hopefully when your next turn rolls around, the Hextia is still on the board. And then because you have the Pookuery in your hand, you can turn the Hextia and the Pookuery into Prime Banshee, triggering the Hextia effect, which then adds Marionetter to your hand. You then can normal summon the Marionetter, set a back row, and then from there you'll usually use the Prime Banshee to swap out the Marionetter for a Meluseek, and then you turn the Prime Banshee and the Meluseek into a Memorygant, which triggers the Meluseek search and the Prime Banshee add back, which is very good. So you get like a ton of cards, and you summon a Memorygant, which can attack over 2 monsters and pop a card. It's just a really good combo that comes up a lot because you are summoning Hextia on turn 1 now. I think that these 2 cards are very good because of combos like that. There were so many times that I started my turn with a Hextia and then I drew the Pookuery, or I searched a Pookuery, and then I was able to go into the Prime Banshee and then make another Hextia if I wanted to go for like a more control board, or make the Memorygant and go for an OTK. So these cards actually are really good and they come up a lot, and I would maybe consider bumping them up to 3 copies per deck. Not sure yet. We also have 2 copies of Link Kribo, 2 copies of Moon Maiden, and 2 copies of Relinquished Anima. I think these are just the best Link 1 monsters you can play. These cards don't matter as much now, which is why I cut one of the Link Kribos. I usually always play 3, but because you have the Pookuery, when you open Pookuery plus Meluseek, you don't go into these cards, you go into Hextia instead, so banishing these off of the Extravagance does not matter nearly as much nowadays as it used to back in the day. The last 2 cards in the extra deck are 1 copy of Selene and 1 copy of Avermax. This should be an access code if you own one, but I still don't because my locals got Maximum Gold Eldorado in so late. I'll have to buy some of those to try to pull access code, but if you own access code, you should play that. You could also consider playing 1 Nightmare Phoenix instead of one of these Link 1 monsters, but I don't think that card comes up very often. I will show you guys my side deck because I do feel it's important for understanding how this deck works, but I'm not going to spend too much time here. We have 3 copies of Droll. It's good in basically like every matchup except Sword Soul, which while Sword Soul is the most popular deck, there are plenty of other decks in the format as well. 3 copies of D-Shifter. This card was not very good for me. It does conflict with the Meluseek, kind of, and it does really conflict with the Pookuery. I think that going forward, I'm going to play Lightning Storm instead of D-Shifter in this deck. 3 copies of Evenly, fantastic card right now. And then when you go first, you side into 3 copies of Appointer and 3 copies of Summon Limit. These cards are good in basically every single matchup. It just gives you so many ways to beat all of the meta decks. I really feel like this deck is so strong after side decking when you go first, because these 6 cards are so powerful, but also they really do complement your other cards. And actually, Summon Limit is a card that I haven't loved in the past because while it does stun your opponent, you aren't able to really combo off on your next turn because it restricts you as well. But with that Pookuery effect, you are able to actually go into some sort of combo even while you have that summon limit on the board, because the Pookuery is a material for a link summon even if you don't normal or special summon it, so it gets around the summon limit restriction. So these cards are the 6 cards that you side in when you go first in virtually every single matchup. You usually also keep in the D barrier, but if D barrier isn't good, you can take that out for one of these. But if you are playing against like Sword Soul, you are keeping in the D barrier and you're putting in all 6 of these cards, and you have your normal trap cards, which are good as well when you go first. So you have a lot of ways to stop your opponent. You have a lot of ways to play around Evenly Matched and Lightning Storm. So I really think after side decking, this deck is very good against Sword Soul. It's just that game 1 that's tough if you go second, and it's the going second in games 2 or 3 that can be kind of challenging as well. But I do think if you put in Lightning Storm, the matchup gets a little bit easier if you want to try that out. Anyway, that is all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Sorry it's not like as upbeat as you might have been expecting. I really wanted to try and get like one small regional top with this deck before making this deck profile, but it is so hard out there with Sword Soul. I mean, there's so many Sword Soul players out there, and Blackout just wrecks this deck, as do many of the synchros like Baxia and Baron. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the profile. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later. Goodbye.